Nobody tells you what happens after. They sell you the goal, the number, the exit, the wire transfer that clears on a random Tuesday afternoon while you're standing in a grocery store holding a box of cereal you no longer need to think about affording. They do not tell you what happens when you put the cereal back anyway, out of habit, because your hands still remember the version of you that checked prices. That version doesn't disappear when the money arrives. That's the first thing nobody tells you, and it matters more than any financial strategy I'm about to give you, because if you don't understand what wealth actually does to a human being, you will spend the next 2 decades chasing a feeling that structurally cannot exist at the destination you've been sold. Here's the uncomfortable truth this video is actually about. Becoming wealthy at 40 is not the same thing as becoming free at 40, and the gap between those two outcomes, that specific invisible gap, is where most people who actually make it lose everything that mattered before the money showed up. I want to talk about what actually changes, not the lifestyle brochure version, not the private jet content, the real version, the version that starts at 2 a.m. when the number in your account has more zeros than you were born into, and you are lying awake because the anxiety didn't leave when the debt did. But before we get there, you need to understand why most people never even get close to this problem. Because the reason you are not wealthy yet is not motivation, it is not discipline, it is not even opportunity in the way you've been taught to think about opportunity. It is a system that was designed with extraordinary precision to keep your capital rotating through someone else's hands before it has time to compound in yours. Let me show you exactly how it works. You earn a salary, the government extracts its share before the money touches your account. What remains, you deposit into a bank. The bank pays you 0.4% on that deposit. The bank then lends your money to someone else at 7, 8, 12, 24% depending on the product. The spread between what they pay you and what they charge the borrower is called the net interest margin. It is how banks produce billions in profit annually using capital they do not own. Your capital, their profit. That is the foundational transaction of the modern financial system, and most people participate in it every single month without registering what is actually happening. This is not a conspiracy, it is accounting. It is published in quarterly earnings reports. JP Morgan made $49.6 billion in net income in 2023. A significant portion of that income was generated using depositor funds that cost the bank almost nothing to hold. You are not a customer of the banking system. You are a raw material supplier. And here is where it gets worse, because while your savings are being deployed at a spread that enriches the institution holding them, the inflation rate is quietly reducing the purchasing power of whatever you didn't save. The money you spent, gone. The money you saved, depreciating in real terms, even as the nominal number sits unchanged on your screen. This is the invisible tax that nobody campaigns on, the one that requires no legislation. It simply runs in the background of every economy every year, quietly transferring wealth from people who hold cash to people who hold assets that appreciate with or faster than inflation. Real estate, equities, businesses, intellectual property, anything that produces cash flow or appreciates in value over time. The wealthy do not save money, they convert money into assets. This is not a mindset difference, it is a structural one, and understanding it is the first real step toward building capital that the system cannot quietly dissolve. Now, here is the concept I want you to hold in the back of your mind for the next few minutes, because I am going to come back to it, and when I do, it will reframe everything I'm about to say about what actually changes at 40. The concept is this. There are 2 kinds of wealth: quantitative wealth, the number, and qualitative wealth, the experience of your own life. Most people pursuing financial freedom are pursuing the first kind, and arriving at it is a real thing. I am not going to tell you the money doesn't matter. The money matters enormously. But the second kind, qualitative wealth, that runs on entirely different inputs. And the brutal irony of aggressive capital accumulation is that the behaviors required to build the first kind systematically destroy the conditions necessary for the second. We will come back to this. Hold it. Right now, let's talk about the actual mechanics of getting there, because you came here for a masterclass, not a philosophy lecture, and I respect your time too much to give you one without the other. The person who reaches $1 billion at 40 or meaningful, life-altering wealth at any level almost never does it through a single income stream that scales linearly with hours worked. The math does not support it. If you are trading time for money at any ratio, there is a ceiling on what that equation can produce. The ceiling is determined by how many hours exist in a week and how much any market will pay for a single hour of your specific labor. To exceed the ceiling, you have to stop selling hours. You have to build something that generates revenue while you sleep, while you're wrong, while you are not paying attention. This is not passive income content. This is capital structure. The shift happens when you stop asking, how do I earn more? And start asking, how do I build something that earns without me? A business that runs on systems rather than your personal presence. A portfolio that compounds without requiring your daily decision. An asset that appreciates without your active management. The practical entry point for most people building in their 30s is not a billion-dollar idea. It is a boring, defensible, cash flow positive business in an industry where the incumbent players are complacent and the margins are being left on the table by operators who built the business in 1994 and haven't updated a process since. Fragmented industries, family-owned businesses without succession plans, service businesses with recurring revenue that nobody has bothered to systematize. These are the actual wealth creation vehicles of the 40-year-old who arrives at a number that changes their family's trajectory. Not the app, not the viral product, the boring, essential, cash-generating machine that serves a specific customer who has no real alternative and knows it. Here's what you do when you find it. You do not buy it with your own money if you can avoid it. You use the asset itself as collateral. You structure an acquisition where the business's own cash flow services the debt used to acquire it. This is called a leveraged buyout at institutional scale and an owner-financed acquisition at the small business level. And it is how people with less capital than you think build more wealth than you'd expect. The business earns, the debt reduces, the equity grows. You own an increasing percentage of something that was generating cash before you touched it. This is not theory. This is a transaction structure used thousands of times annually by buyers who understand that the goal is not to find money and then find a business. The goal is to find the right business and then find the appropriate structure to control it. If you are watching this and you have between $50,000 and $500,000 in accessible capital, that range is wide because this works across it. You are not too small to execute this. The businesses that fit this model are not on venture capital radar. They are not being bid up by private equity. They are being listed on business broker marketplaces by owners who built something real and need someone to take it from them before they close it. That is the opportunity. Not glamorous, completely functional. Now, pause here because I want to ask you something directly. If this is the first time you are hearing the mechanics of how real capital actually moves, if nobody in your family, your school, your immediate network ever explained how leveraged acquisition works, how net interest margin transfers your deposit wealth to institutional profit, how inflation functions as a hidden tax on cash holders, then you need to understand something important. That gap is not an accident of your individual circumstance. That gap is structural. The financial system produces better outcomes for people who understand how it works. It was built by people who understood how it worked. The information was never hidden. It was simply never distributed through the channels that reach most people. This channel exists to close that gap. If that's useful to you, if this conversation is different from what you're finding elsewhere, subscribe now, because what I'm about to tell you about what actually happens when you arrive at the number is the part of this video that will stay with you longest. And it is also the part that, if you understand it before you get there, will allow you to build something that the money cannot take away from you when it arrives. Back to the concept I asked you to hold. Two kinds of wealth. Quantitative and qualitative. Here is what actually changes at 40 when the number arrives. Your relationship with risk changes before anything else. Not because you become reckless, the opposite. You become, in many ways, more conservative than you were when you had nothing, because now you have something to protect. And protection is a fundamentally different psychological posture than accumulation. Accumulation requires a particular kind of fearlessness that is partly courage and partly the fact that losing everything looks identical to your current position. Protection requires vigilance, discipline, the willingness to say no to things that would have excited you 5 years ago. The people around you change in ways you do not fully register until the change is complete. Not dramatically, nobody shows up with a different face, but the quality of attention shifts. There's a category of relationship that forms around proximity to resources. Not malicious, not conscious, simply human. People orient toward warmth. Capital is of warmth of a particular kind. You will begin to feel the orientation before you can name it. Conversations that used to be about ideas will begin to contain, faintly at first, then more plainly, a kind of positioning, an angling, a subtext that wasn't there before. You will not know who to trust more precisely because the visible behavior of the people around you will not change dramatically. The change will be subtle, and subtlety, at scale, over time, is more dangerous than anything obvious. What you will miss most, and I want to be precise about this because it is the thing nobody warns you about, is the texture of a problem that genuinely has stakes. When you are building, every decision carries weight. The wrong hire costs 3 months of runway. The wrong pricing kills the quarter. The wrong partnership costs you 2 years and a lawsuit. These stakes, real, immediate, consequential, produce a quality of presence that is extremely difficult to replicate from the other side of financial security. You will have more resources at 40 with wealth than you had at 32 without it. You will also have, in specific and surprising ways, less urgency, less necessity, less of the productive friction that sharpens thinking and forces creative problem solving at the level that only genuine constraint can produce. This is not an argument against building wealth. It is an argument for understanding what you are actually trading and making that trade consciously, rather than discovering the terms after the transaction has closed. Here is the tactical response to what I just described, because this is a strategy channel and I am not in the business of naming problems without handing you the mechanism to address them. Before you arrive at the number, and this instruction is only useful if you act on it before, not after, you need to identify the categories of your life that currently produce meaning that is not contingent on financial outcome. The work you do that you would do differently if you needed the result less. The relationships in which the other person has absolutely nothing to gain from proximity to your resources. The physical or creative practice that produces satisfaction through the process rather than the product. Document them, not metaphorically, literally. Write down what you do between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. on a Saturday that has nothing to do with your financial ambition. Write down the last conversation you had that had no subtext, no positioning, no professional utility. Write down what you read when nobody will ever ask you about it. These are not soft metrics. They are the infrastructure of qualitative wealth, and if you do not identify and protect them before the quantitative change ever changes, the quantitative change will erode them faster than you can notice the erosion happening. The wealthy people who are miserable, and there are more of them than the aspirational content ecosystem will ever show you, are miserable because the money failed to deliver. The money delivered exactly what money delivers. They are miserable because they dismantled everything that the money could not replace in the process of acquiring the money, and arrived at the destination without a map back to the things that made the journey feel worth taking. Now, let's talk about capital preservation, because arriving at the number is one problem and keeping it is a structurally different one. The single largest destroyer of generational wealth is not bad investment. It is lifestyle inflation that gets capitalized into fixed costs before the income that supports it is confirmed to be permanent. You close a deal, you upgrade the apartment, you upgrade the car, you upgrade the school, the neighborhood, the vacation, the wardrobe. Each of these upgrades is a reasonable individual decision and the collectively catastrophic pattern, because lifestyle costs, unlike business costs, do not reduce when revenue reduces. They're sticky. They come with social commitments and children's expectations, and a standard of living that, once established, costs real psychological capital to revise downward. The wealthy families that maintain wealth cross generations, not the ones that make it, the ones that keep it, treat lifestyle expenditure the way a CFO treats overhead: necessary, controlled, reviewed annually against actual income rather than projected income. They separate the asset base from the spending account. They do not spend from principal, they spend from yield. And when the yield fluctuates, which it will because every income stream fluctuates, the lifestyle does not fluctuate with it because the lifestyle was never sized against the peak. This is the operating principle. Size your life against your sustainable baseline, not your best quarter, not your exit year, not the year the business sold and the wire cleared and everything felt like arrival. The baseline, always the baseline. The other preservation principle that almost nobody talks about is tax positioning before liquidity events, not after. The year your business sells or your equity vests or your investment exits is not the year to call a tax advisor. That year, the transaction is already structured, the liability is already determined. The call you needed was 18 months earlier when the structure of the transaction was still malleable, when there was still room to use charitable vehicles, opportunity zone investments, installment sale elections, or trust structures to reduce a tax event that, handled reactively, will transfer 20 to 37% of a generational asset to a government entity before it ever reaches your family. The wealthy do not pay less tax because they cheat. They pay less tax because they plan. The planning window is before the event. Every dollar of tax-advantaged structuring you do before a liquidity event is a dollar that compounds inside your family's capital base rather than leaving it permanently. This is the actual behavior gap between people who build wealth and people who maintain it over time. Now, one final thing, because this video is almost done, and I want to leave you with the piece that I think matters most, not as a strategy, but as a framework for how you think about the entire accumulation project. The 40-year-old who builds something real, who reaches a number that changes their family's trajectory, who does it with the right capital structure and the right preservation strategy and the right understanding of what the money can and cannot replace, that person has solved a specific, finite problem. They have answered the question, can I build enough capital to remove financial constraint from my life and my family's life? The answer, after everything, the leveraged acquisitions, the compounding equity, the tax positioning, the lifestyle discipline, the answer is yes. Structurably, provably, yes. But there's a second question that the first question's answer cannot touch, and it is the one that will matter more at 41 than the number ever did at 40. The question is, what am I actually for? Not what am I building, not what I'm worth. What am I for? What is the specific, non-financial contribution that only my particular combination of experience, judgment, and capacity can make to the people and problems in front of me? The people who thrive after the number, who actually live well inside the wealth, rather than spending the rest of their lives managing it, have a clear answer to that question that exists independently of the financial project. It was there before the money. It survived the accumulation. It is still there when the wire clears and the phone goes face down on the counter and the world outside the window goes on exactly as it was. The money is the tool. The question is the work. Build the tool well. Do not mistake it for the work. That is the actual change.